Okay, now we're going to take a look at finding a starting point and a rate of change from a table. What we just looked at was finding starting point and rate of change from a graph. Starting point on the graph is where the line crosses your y-axis, which is why it's called your y-intercept. Therefore, the coordinates of the starting point are always 0 for your x, and then whatever your y value is. That's always going to be the number where it crosses the y-axis. The key here is your coordinate will always have a 0 for your x. That's where your y-intercept is going to be located. So when we're looking at a table, if I'm trying to find the starting point, and I will start here with B instead of starting with A, I'm looking for where x is 0. In this case, x, which is always your left column and y is your right column, is 0 in the first slot. I want to point out right now that it will not always be in the first slot. Oftentimes we might have 0 down here. That doesn't mean that the first spot is your starting point. The starting point is always where your x is 0. So my starting point here, the ordered pair would be 0, 3, my starting point, which it means that when no time had elapsed, they were 3 feet from the motion detector. Rate of change I'll go through fairly quickly. We've been doing this quite a bit now, but remember you're checking your jumps, you're checking your change. Your change in your x is a +1, a +1, and so on. Your change in your y is a +5, +5, +5, +5. Rate of change, remember rate means fraction. Never put your rate of change in as an ordered pair. Your rate of change in this case is 5/1, or just 5. And then we have labels, so we must include that as part of my answer. The 5 represents feet, so it's feet per, 1 represents seconds, feet per second. A question you will be asked is, what does the rate of change and starting point mean in the context of the situation? We've done this, we just haven't called it this yet. So what does this point mean? Well, the x is 0, that means no time had elapsed. So we'd say the starting point, and we can abbreviate that SP, means when no time has elapsed, the 3 represents feet, we are 3 feet from the motion detector. So we're assuming this is another one of the skateboarding problems. One thing I want us to be careful of when we're talking about the rate of change is identifying whether it's positive or negative. In this case, it's a +5. Positive, if you remember, in our graphs, means the graph was going up. So a +5 means we are moving five feet away from the motion detector. Each second. So remember, away or closer to comes from whether it's positive or if it's negative. Next, this is getting much more to the heart of what we're going to be doing, our actions that we'll take in class. Is oftentimes I'm going to ask you to find slope or rate of change, because remember, those words are interchangeable. between two ordered pairs. In order to do that, so far we found it from graphs and we found it from tables, but we haven't found it from ordered pairs. But all tables are really just ordered pairs stacked on top of each other. So what we would do is take your two ordered pairs and write them vertically. Stack them on top of each other. 0, 5, and 2, 9 here. Really, you've just created an X, Y table here. And you can now find your rate of change the same way. How do you get from 5 to 9? You're adding 4. How do you get from 0 to 2? You're adding 2. So your rate of change, or your slope, is your change in Y divided by your change in X, which is 4 over 2. You could write that as 2 over 1, or you could write that as 2. Either of these would be correct answers. We don't have anything here as far as labels, so I don't need to put labels here. I want you to follow this pattern and try part B. C and D are slightly different. They're kind of special cases. So try B, and then we'll come back and talk about C and D together. So press pause and go ahead and work through part B now, please. Okay, so we started by stacking our ordered pairs. We find our change. From 5 to 13, we're going up 8. From 7 to 2, we're going down 5. So your rate of change is 8 over negative 5. You can write that and leave that as your answer. You can change that to a negative 8 over a positive 5, or a negative in front. Or you could have negative 8 over positive 5. All three of those are the same thing, because recognize if you had started with this 2, 13 ordered pair on top, your 8 would have been negative, but your 5 would have been positive. So any of these three answers are correct. Just notice the 8 is always in your numerator, the 5 is always in your denominator. Okay, part C is only slightly different, but there is a major difference. If you look at the ordered pairs, 4, 9, and 4, 2, when I take a look at my jumps, it's jumping from 9 to 2, that's going down 7. This one isn't jumping at all, that's a 0. It's always negative 7 over 0. Let's stop there, keep that idea in mind, because we're not done with it, and compare it with what happens in part D. In part D, when I write my ordered pairs in a stack, 1, 7, and 8, 7, and I look at my jumps, this time my Y isn't changing, but my X is. This rate would be 0 over 7. My question to you is that the same thing? And I'd say press pause right now and put them both in your calculator as you see them, and see if your calculator gives you the same answer. So press pause, try that, have a quick conversation with each other as to whether they're going to be the same or not, and then unpause it and hear the answers. Well, don't worry, your calculators are not wrong. These are not the same thing. When you are dividing by a 0, your calculator should have given you an error, because you can't divide by 0. In this case, there is not a slope of 0, because your calculator doesn't give you a 0. We call this, when you're dividing by 0, a slope or a rate of change that is undefined. You can't define this because you can't divide by 0. Here you do get 0 when you divide 0 by 7. If 0 is in the numerator, that is the only time you have a slope of 0. And I'm writing the word out, you can write the number. The differences would be the way the line looks. You guys should have, or remember, that if you have a slope of 0, you have a horizontal line. I'm going to make that Z really big. the z and the z. If the slope is 0, your line is horizontal. On the other hand, if your slope is undefined, that's when you have a vertical line, because that's when your vertical change can be anything. In this case, we're saying it's -7, but your horizontal change is nothing. You're not moving left to right at all. That is an undefined slope. Okay, the next page of your notes will be covered on the next video.